He couldn't stop laughing as he signed our divorce papers. "You're just a tomato seller," he mocked. "What could you possibly have? You won't believe what I was hiding from him for 3 years, and the government grant that changed everything. Stay until the end, the final twist will leave you speechless." Hello family, before we start this intriguing story, we would like you to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified once we drop new story. Also comment the time you are watching this and country you are watching from. The ceiling fan in Barrister Okechukwa's office creaked with each rotation, doing little to cool the tension that filled the small room in downtown Lagos. Chinenye sat across from her husband of 12 years, watching him flip through the divorce papers with the same casual indifference he'd shown her for months. "So this is it?" Damilare asked, not bothering to look up at her. His designer watch caught the afternoon light streaming through the dusty window. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Chinenye's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her simple head wrap. The same one she'd worn to the market that morning, selling tomatoes and peppers like she had every day for the past 3 years. "You know why we're here, Damilare?" "Do I?" He leaned back in the worn leather chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Because from where I'm sitting you're the one throwing away a good marriage. I provide for this family. I put food on our table." The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Damilare, if we could just proceed with provide." Chinenye's voice was barely above a whisper, but something in her tone made Damilare finally look at her. "When was the last time you gave me money for groceries? When did you last pay Kelechi's school fees?" 3 months earlier, Chinenye had stood in their small kitchen, staring at the empty pot on the stove. Her stomach growled, echoing in the silence of their 2-bedroom flat in Surulere. Kelechi, their 10-year-old daughter, sat at the plastic table doing homework by candlelight because the electricity had been cut off again. "Mama, when is Papa coming home?" Kelechi had asked, her pencil scratching against the paper. "Soon, my love." The lie tasted bitter in Chinenye's mouth. She knew Damilare was at the beer parlor with his friends, spending money they didn't have on drinks and boasting about business deals that never materialized. That night, something had shifted inside her. As she watched her daughter sleep on an empty stomach, Chinenye made a decision that would change everything. "You're being dramatic," Damilare said, signing the first page with a flourish. "So what if I enjoy myself sometimes? A man needs to relax after working hard." Barrister Okechukwu shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd seen many divorces in his 20-year career, but something about this case felt different. The woman sitting across from him had an air of quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her simple appearance. "Working hard." Chinenye's laugh was hollow. "Damilare, you haven't had a real job in 2 years. Your business meetings happen in bars and your investments disappear faster than morning mist." "At least I'm trying." He slammed his hand on the desk, making the inkwell jump. "What do you do besides complain? Sell tomatoes in the market like some common trader?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Chinenye felt something cold settle in her chest, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a small, knowing smile that made Damilare pause mid-rant. "Just sign the papers, Damilare," she said softly. "Let's end this." He stared at her for a long moment as if seeing her for the first time. Then he shrugged and picked up the pen again. "Fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost." Page after page, he signed with increasing enthusiasm. With each signature, his smirk grew wider. He was practically laughing by the time he reached the financial disclosure section. "You know what's funny?" he said, not waiting for an answer. "You think you're so smart leaving me? But what are you going to do? Live in your mother's village? Sell tomatoes for the rest of your life?" He signed another page with an exaggerated flourish. "I'm the one with connections. I'm the one with potential. You're just ordinary." Chinenye watched him sign the papers that would legally separate their finances, divide their assets, and dissolve their marriage. She watched him laugh at his own cruel jokes, witnessed him mock the woman who had stood by him through years of broken promises and empty dreams. And through it all, she said nothing about the bank statements hidden in her purse. Nothing about the business she'd been building in secret for the past 3 years. Nothing about the numbers that would soon be read aloud in this very room. "There," Damilare said, sliding the completed papers across the desk with a theatrical gesture. "Your freedom, madam. I hope it was worth it." Barrister Okechukwu gathered the documents, his expression unreadable. "We'll need to wait for the judge to review these before the final decree. The hearing is scheduled for next week." "A formality," Damilare waved dismissively. "Judge Adebola and I go way back. This will be over before you know it." He stood up, adjusting his rumpled shirt. Chinenye, I almost feel sorry for you. Starting over at your age with nothing but a market stall and dreams. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at her one more time. You know, I used to think you were clever. Turns out you're just another foolish woman who doesn't know a good thing when she has it. The door slammed behind him, leaving Chinenye alone with the lawyer. The silence stretched between them until Barrister Okechukwu spoke. Mrs. Chinenye, he said carefully, are you certain about the financial information you've provided? Because when this goes before Judge Adebola next week. She met his eyes steadily. I'm certain. Outside, she could hear Damilare's laughter echoing in the hallway as he called someone on his phone, probably to celebrate his victory. Chinenye gathered her simple handbag and stood up. Next week, in that courtroom, everything would change. But for now, she had tomatoes to sell and a daughter to feed. The real story was just beginning. 1 week later, the Ikeja High Court buzzed with the low murmur of morning proceedings. Judge Adebola, a stern woman in her 50s with silver-rimmed glasses, shuffled through case files as the clerk called out names. The courtroom smelled of old wood polish and nervous sweat. Damilare strutted in wearing his best suit. The navy blue one he'd bought 3 years ago for a job interview that never led anywhere. He nodded confidently at Judge Adebola, who barely glanced up from her papers. Behind him, Chinenye entered quietly, still wearing her simple wrapper and blouse, carrying the same worn handbag she'd had since their wedding. The case of Damilare versus Chinenye, the clerk announced. Petition for divorce and asset division. Damilare leaned over to his lawyer, a young man fresh from law school who'd agreed to take the case for a fraction of his usual fee. This is just a formality, right? Like I told you, the judge and my family have history. His lawyer nodded nervously, shuffling through papers that contained very little information about Chinenye's finances, because Damilare had insisted there was nothing to discover. Your Honor, Damilare's lawyer began, standing up with the shakiness of inexperience, my client seeks a fair division of marital assets. As the primary breadwinner of the family, Mr. Damilare has contributed significantly to their shared wealth and... Judge Adebola held up her hand. Before we proceed with asset division, I need to review the financial disclosures from both parties. She opened a thick folder. Mr. Damilare, according to your statement, you claim ownership of one motorcycle, valued at 50,000 naira, and savings of approximately 12,000 naira. Is this correct? Damilare stood up proudly. Yes, Your Honor. I've also got several business ventures in the pipeline. Big opportunities that my wife, ex-wife, never understood or supported. A few people in the gallery chuckled softly. Judge Adebola was not among them. I see. She turned to another set of papers. And Mrs. Chinenye, you've listed your assets as well. Your statement shows. The courtroom fell silent. Even the clerk stopped typing. Judge Adebola removed her glasses, cleaned them slowly and put them back on. She read the figure again, this time more carefully. Mrs. Chinenye, according to these bank statements and business documentation, you have declared total assets worth. She paused, looking directly at Damilare. 4.7 million naira. The words hit the courtroom like thunder. Damilare's confident smile froze on his face. His lawyer dropped his pen. Even the security guard by the door turned to stare. I'm sorry, Your Honor, Damilare stammered, his voice suddenly small. There must be some mistake. My wife sells tomatoes in Alaba market. She can barely afford school fees for our daughter. Judge Adebola continued reading. The assets include a registered business called Golden Harvest Enterprises, 3 rental properties in Ikorodu, and substantial savings across 4 different banks. She looked up. Mrs. Chinenye, can you confirm these figures? Chinenye stood up slowly. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. Yes, Your Honor. Every figure is accurate. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Damilare spun around to stare at his wife as if seeing a stranger. His face had gone from confident brown to ashen gray. This is impossible, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. She's lying. She sells vegetables. Look at her. He gestured wildly at Chinenye's simple clothes. Does she look like someone with millions? Judge Adebola's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Mr. Damilare, sit down. Mrs. Chinenye, please explain to the court how you acquired these assets. Chinenye took a deep breath. For the first time in years she felt truly seen. Your Honor, 3 years ago I started selling tomatoes in Alaba market with 5,000 naira I borrowed from my sister. But I didn't just sell tomatoes. I watched the market every day. I saw how the big traders operated, how they moved goods from farm to consumer. I noticed that small-scale farmers were getting cheated by middlemen, and customers were paying too much for poor quality produce. Damilare was shaking his head in disbelief. You're lying. You come home tired every day complaining about small sales. I came home tired, Chinenye continued, ignoring him, because I wasn't just selling tomatoes. I was building relationships. I connected directly with farmers in Ogun State, cutting out the middlemen. I offered them better prices for their crops and guaranteed customers in Lagos. Judge Adebola leaned forward, genuinely interested. Continue. Within 6 months, I had 5 farmers exclusively supplying me. Within a year, I was supplying 3 major restaurants in Victoria Island. I reinvested every profit back into the business. The courtroom was dead silent now. Everyone hung on her words. I kept my same small stall in the market as a front. Every morning I would sell tomatoes to regular customers like I always had. But in the afternoons I was coordinating truck deliveries, managing inventory and expanding my network. The rental properties, Judge Adebola prompted. I bought them one by one with business profits. Small houses in Ikorodu that I renovated and rented out. The rental income funded further business expansion. Chinenye's voice grew stronger with each word. Everything was registered in my maiden name, Uche, which is why my husband never knew. Damilare finally found his voice. But the electricity bills. The rent. You always said we couldn't afford. For the first time, Chinenye looked directly at him. I said we couldn't afford them. Because you contributed nothing. Every bill in our house, every meal on our table, every uniform for Kalechi, I paid for all of it from my market earnings while you spent your days making grand plans and empty promises. The truth hit Damilare like cold water. All those times he'd mocked her, small business. All those evenings he'd come home to find dinner waiting, assuming it was bought with his occasional contributions. All those school fees that somehow got paid, all those bills that mysteriously never led to disconnection. Your Honor, Chinenye continued, my husband believed I was just a simple market woman because that's what he wanted to see. It was easier for him to feel superior to a struggling wife than to admit he'd contributed nothing to our family's survival. Judge Adebola reviewed the documents again. Mrs. Chinenye, these business records show consistent growth over 3 years. Your tax payments are up to date, and your business registration is proper. Mr. Damilare, do you have any evidence to dispute these claims? Damilare's lawyer frantically whispered in his ear, but what could he say? For 3 years he'd been so busy being the man of the house, that he'd never bothered to ask how they actually survived. I don't understand, Damilare said weakly. If you had all this money, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think we were poor? Chinenye's smile was sad but not unkind. Because every time I tried to discuss money or business, you told me to focus on being a good wife. Every time I suggested we invest in something together, you said I didn't understand how the world worked. You made it clear that my opinions didn't matter. The weight of years of dismissal and condescension settled on Damilare's shoulders like a heavy blanket. He remembered now, all the time she'd started to speak about her day at the market and he'd cut her off. All the time she tried to show him receipts or talk about her customers, and he'd waved her away. Judge Adebola closed the file. Based on these financial disclosures, it's clear that Mrs. Chinenye has been the primary financial contributor to this marriage. Mr. Damilare, your claim for asset division is significantly weakened by these revelations. Damilare slumped in his chair. The man who had walked into the courtroom expecting to claim half of nothing now realized he was entitled to half of everything. And everything belonged to the woman he'd spent years underestimating. However, the judge continued, there's one more matter to address before I make my final ruling. She picked up another document and Chinenye tensed. There was something else, something that would change everything once more. Mrs. Chinenye, there's the matter of your recent business expansion. Can you tell the court about Golden Harvest Enterprises' latest development? The courtroom held its breath. Even Chinenye looked surprised by the question. What Judge Adebola was about to reveal would shock everyone, including Chinenye herself. Judge Adebola held up a document that neither lawyer had seen before. The official seal of the Lagos State Ministry of Commerce and Industry gleamed under the courtroom lights. Mrs. Chinenye, the judge said carefully, 3 days ago, my office received notification from the state government regarding your business. Are you aware of this correspondence? Chinenye's confident expression flickered with confusion. No, Your Honor. What correspondence? Damilare straightened up slightly, a spark of hope igniting in his eyes. Maybe there was a problem with her business. Maybe she owed taxes or had violated some regulation. Maybe this was his way out. Judge Adebola opened the document. It appears that Golden Harvest Enterprises has been selected as one of 3 businesses to receive the Lagos State Agricultural Innovation Grant. The amount awarded is... She paused, double-checking the figure. 2.5 million naira. The courtroom gasped collectively. Chinenye's hand flew to her mouth in shock. She had applied for the grant 6 months ago but never expected to win. Furthermore, the judge continued, the document states that your business model has been recommended for replication across West Africa by the African Development Bank. There's a potential partnership worth. She stopped reading and looked directly at Chinenye. Mrs. Chinenye, did you know your business was being considered for international expansion? Damilare's world collapsed entirely. The woman he had mocked for selling tomatoes like a common trader was not only a millionaire. She was about to become an internationally recognized entrepreneur. This can't be happening, he whispered, but his voice carried in the silent courtroom. She's just my wife. She's nobody special. He stopped, hearing his own words. In that moment, surrounded by legal documents that proved just how wrong he'd been about everything, Damilare finally understood what he had lost. Chinenye was still staring at the judge in disbelief. Your Honor, I applied for that grant months ago. I never heard back. I assumed. According to this letter, they've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. The contact address they had was outdated. Judge Adebola smiled slightly. The first time anyone had seen her expression soften all day. Congratulations, Mrs. Chinenye. It seems your timing for this divorce was quite fortunate. A reporter from Lagos television who had been covering routine court cases suddenly became very interested in taking notes. This was exactly the kind of story that made headlines. Market woman turns millionaire entrepreneur while husband remains clueless. Damilare's lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently, we need to contest this. We need to claim that some of these assets were acquired during the marriage so you're entitled to half. But Damilare wasn't listening. He was remembering something from 2 months ago. 2 months earlier, Chinenye had come home excited about something. She'd rushed into their small living room where Damilare was watching football, waving some papers in her hand. Dammy, you won't believe what happened today. I met this man from the government. He said my business model is exactly what they're looking for in their development program. He gave me these forms to fill out for a grant application. If we win, we could expand the business, maybe even... Woman, can't you see I'm watching the match? Damilare had said without taking his eyes off the television. Why are you always disturbing me with these your small market stories? Go and prepare dinner. She had stood there for a moment, papers in hand, then quietly gone to the kitchen. He never saw the forms again and never asked about them. Now, sitting in that courtroom, Damilare realized that the papers she'd been waving were probably the grant application that had just made her even wealthier. Judge Adebola was still reading from the government document. It also states here that Mrs. Chinenye's business has created employment for 47 people in the agricultural supply chain. Her model has increased income for rural farmers by an average of 30%. She looked up at the courtroom. Mrs. Chinenye, you've built something remarkable. Not just a business but a system that helps your entire community. Chinenye finally found her voice. Your Honor, I never thought of it as anything special. I just saw problems and tried to solve them. When farmers complained about low prices, I offered them better deals. When restaurant owners complained about poor quality produce, I guaranteed fresh supplies. It seemed logical. Logic that created jobs, improved lives and built wealth, the judge noted. Mr. Damilare, your wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, has accomplished something extraordinary while you were. What exactly were you doing during this time? Damilare opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. What could he say? That he'd been planning? That he'd been networking? That he'd been looking for opportunities? The truth was simpler and more painful. He'd been doing nothing. While his wife built an empire from a tomato stall, he'd been sitting in beer parlors, complaining about the economy and waiting for success to find him. Your Honor, his lawyer tried one last desperate move. My client was providing emotional support and maintaining the household while his wife focused on business. Surely that contribution deserves recognition in the asset division. Judge Adebola's expression could have frozen water. Counselor, are you seriously arguing that Mr. Damilare's contribution to this marriage was sitting at home while his wife worked multiple jobs to support the family? The lawyer quickly sat down. After reviewing all evidence, Judge Adebola said formally, This court finds that the petitioner, Mrs. Chinenye, has grounds for divorce based on irreconcilable differences and lack of spousal support. She paused, making sure everyone was listening. Regarding asset division, given that Mrs. Chinenye's assets were acquired through her individual business efforts, using capital she borrowed independently, and built during a period when Mr. Damilare contributed neither financially nor supportively to the household, this court awards Mrs. Chinenye full ownership of all assets listed in her financial disclosure. Damilare's face went completely white. Your Honor, please. I made mistakes, but I'm still her husband. I have rights. Mr. Damilare, the judge said sternly, you had the right to be a partner in your marriage. You chose instead to be a burden. You had the right to support your wife's ambitions. You chose instead to mock them. You had the right to contribute to your family's success. You chose instead to take credit for achievements you never helped create. Furthermore, Judge Adebola continued, given Mrs. Chinenye's new status as a government grant recipient and international business prospect, and considering that Mr. Damilare has no legal claim to assets acquired through her independent efforts, this court also awards Mrs. Chinenye full custody of their daughter, with Mr. Damilare granted supervised visitation rights pending his demonstration of stable employment and housing. The gavel came down with finality. Divorce granted. Case closed. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Damilare sat frozen in his chair. The magnitude of his loss was finally sinking in. He'd lost his wife, his daughter, his home, and any claim to a fortune he never knew existed. Chinenye gathered her papers quietly. As she passed his table, she paused. Damilare, she said softly, I never wanted it to end like this. All I ever wanted was for you to see me as your partner, not your burden. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes. Chinenye, I'm sorry. I never knew. If I had known. That's the problem, she said sadly. You never bothered to know. You were so busy being the man of the house that you forgot to notice who was actually holding the house together. 3 months later, Chinenye stood in the boardroom of a gleaming office building in Victoria Island. The sign on the door read Golden Harvest Enterprises Regional Headquarters. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Lagos Harbor bustling with activity. Mama, is this really our office? Kelechi asked, spinning around in one of the leather chairs. Yes, my love. This is where we'll work to help farmers and feed families all across Africa. The little girl beamed with pride. Can I tell my friends at school that my mama is a big businesswoman? Chinenye laughed, the first genuinely happy sound she'd made in years. You can tell them that your mama is someone who never gave up, even when people told her she was just ordinary. On her desk was a newspaper clipping. Lagos market woman's business empire expands to 5 African countries. The photo showed her shaking hands with government officials, still wearing her simple wrapper and blouse, but now with a confidence that shone through the image. 6 months after the divorce, Damilare still lived in a single room in his brother's house in Mushin. He'd finally found work as a security guard at a shopping mall, earning barely enough to pay for his supervised visits with Kelechi. Sometimes he would see Chinenye's success stories in the newspapers or on television. Golden Harvest Enterprises was now mentioned in business schools as a case study of innovative agricultural development. His ex-wife had become the face of African entrepreneurship. And every time he saw her picture, he remembered the day he signed those divorce papers, laughing at the woman he thought was nothing more than a tomato seller. He never laughed about it anymore. Moral lesson. Never underestimate the power of quiet determination and hard work. Success doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it grows slowly, steadily, in the hands of those who are willing to solve problems rather than complain about them. The greatest tragedy is not failing to achieve your dreams, but failing to recognize and support the dreams of those closest to you. When we dismiss others as ordinary, we often reveal our own limitations, not theirs. True partnership in marriage means seeing your spouse as an equal, supporting their ambitions and sharing in both struggles and victories. Pride and arrogance can blind us to the extraordinary potential that exists in the people we think we know best. Finally, appearances can be deceiving. The person selling tomatoes in the market today might be building an empire for tomorrow. Respect everyone's journey, because you never know who might surprise you with their hidden strengths and quiet achievements. Thank you for watching till the end. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos like this.